All right, so in the last lesson, we looked at one way of getting our Node.js app to work with the MongoDB database, and that was through the use of the native MongoDB driver. You saw just how painful it was to do something very simple. I mean, in the Mongo shell, it was like 3-4 lines of commands, and it turned into 20-30 lines of code through using the native driver. And a lot of that was down to adding in validation code and writing a lot of the boilerplate, or just the simple act of connecting to the MongoDB server. This is why most Node developers who are working with MongoDB will use a package called Mongoose. And this is what's called an ODM, or an Object Document Mapper. What it will do is it will allow your Node.js app, which speaks the language of JavaScript objects, to be able to talk to your MongoDB database, which speaks in the language of documents and collections and databases. And the main objective of this framework is to simplify the writing of validation code, the writing of your business logic boilerplate, and just to make the code just shorter and easier to work with. And essentially everything that we did previously using the MongoDB driver, if we were to use Mongoose, all we have to write is pretty much just this. Right? We require the Mongo package, we connect to the database, and we create a new database if it doesn't exist. And then we create a new model of how our data will be represented. This is the only new part, and we're going to be going through it in detail. And then with that new model, we create a new document. And then we simply just save our model into the MongoDB database. So it's vastly shorter, and I'm going to talk through it in detail and show you how we can use it. Way back when we were working with the document object model, if you remember, it was quite a pain to write all of the code for the DOM. But then when we started using jQuery and we started adding those dollar signs everywhere, everything got a lot shorter and a lot simpler and easier to work with. Well, essentially Mongoose does the same job. So let's go ahead and see how we can use Mongoose to make our fruits database way simpler. First things first, make sure that you've got an active MongoDB server that's running. And then if you open up a Mongo shell and you say show DBs, you can see that we've got our fruits DB already created. And you can see that it's so small that it doesn't even really register a size. But this time we're going to create our fruits DB and all of the data inside using just Mongoose. So I'm going to actually delete that database. And in the Mongo shell, in order to delete an entire database, what you have to do is you first have to switch to that database. So you'll say use fruits DB, and we've switched to this particular database, and then we just say db.drop database, and then a set of parentheses to run that command, and now we no longer have the fruits DB. So if I say show DBs, you can see that it's been wiped from our MongoDB server. Now we're ready to head back into our app.js, and we're going to modify all of this code. And instead of using the native MongoDB driver, we're going to use Mongoose. And I'm just going to show you just how much it cuts down on our code and how much simpler and easier to understand the code becomes. First things first, we have to require Mongoose. So I'm going to delete these two lines where we're requiring the native Mongo client and the assert testing package. In our app.js, we now want to use this package called Mongoose. But if you remember, we haven't actually installed it using npm yet. So if you head over to Hyper and make sure that you are still inside your Fruits project, then go ahead and use npm install to install the Mongoose package. Once that's done, then we can go ahead and move on to the next goal, which is to connect to our MongoDB database. Now you can see at the moment, in order to do that, we're taking up something like 20 lines of code, and some of that will be validation code, and some of it will just be the simple act of connecting to the database. Now, I want to show you just how simple all of that becomes by using Mongoose instead. So we'll write mongoose dot connect, and then we're going to open up a set of parentheses, and we're going to add the URL that we want to connect to. That connection URL will look very similar to what we've got here. It's going to be a string that is MongoDB : 2// localhost : 27017. That will specify the port where we can access our MongoDB database server. And then all we have to do is put another / at the end of there, and then we can specify the name of the database that we want to create or connect to. So it's going to make a connection to our MongoDB server, and then it's going to look for a database called FruitsDB. And if it doesn't exist, then it will create this brand new database. And that replaces all of this. So we can now go ahead and delete all of that. And now if I hit save and we go over to our Hyper terminal and use node app.js to run our app, then you can see we've now started our server, but we still get the same deprecation warning as we saw before. Now we have to again pass this use new URL parser. If we again copy this and paste it into Google to remind ourselves of what that solution was, you can see that this person who's answered has actually very kindly included what you should do if you're using Mongoose to connect to your database. And this is basically what we have to do. We have to add it right at the end of the connect method. So let's go ahead and add that in to change our code. So we've got mongoose.connect, and then this is the URL we want to connect to. And then we're going to add that new option at the end here, which is to use the new URL parser. And this will resolve that deprecation warning. So now the next thing that we want to do is to insert some data. And you can see that we're doing that right now through these 20 lines. But this code is essentially very similar to what we saw when we were using the Mongo shell. Now I want to show you how you would do that with Mongoose, because it's a little bit different from what we've done so far. The first thing we have to do is to create a new schema. And this is basically a blueprint or the structure of our data that we're going to save into our MongoDB database. In order to do this, we can create a new const that's called fruit schema. And this is going to be equal to a new Mongoose schema. And then we open up a set of parentheses, and inside there we add a new JavaScript object. So we open up our curly braces. Now in this schema, we basically scaffold out how we want data in a particular collection to be structured. So for example, if we were creating a new fruit document, what would the structure of that data look like? Well, it might have a name, which is going to be of data type string. And then it might have maybe a rating, which will be a number. And then it might have just a review, which will be a text review for that fruit. This is what our fruit schema would look like using Mongoose. And this lays out the foundation for every new fruit document that will be added to our database. After we create the schema, we use the schema to create a Mongoose model. And we do that by saying const fruit is equal to a mongoose dot model. And then we specify two parameters. The first one is what is going to be the name of the collection that is going to comply with this particular schema. Well, in our case, we want to create a collection of fruits, right? So we'll have these fruits, each as individual records or documents. They'll be saved into a collection called fruits, and then that will be inside our database called FruitsDB. So the first parameter is always going to be a string here. Now the Mongoose way of doing things is to specify the singular name of your collection. So if you have a collection of fruits, then inside here will be the word fruit. in a singular form. And Mongoose will very cleverly convert this string into a pluralized form to create your collection. By doing this, you will have created a new collection called fruits. And those fruits have to stick to the structure that we've specified in the fruit schema. And now, and only now, are we ready to create a new fruit document. I'm going to create something called fruit with a lowercase f. This is going to be a new fruit with a capital F, and this is to show that I'm creating this document from this model that we specified up here, which means that it's going to have to stick to this schema that we laid out here as well. So now this new fruit is going to have a name. Let's call it apple. It's going to be an apple that we're going to save into our database. And then we're going to give it a rating. And I'm going to give a rating out of 10. So I think apples are decent. Let's give it a 7. And then let's give it a review. Pretty solid as a fruit. Can't really hate on apples, right? And now that we've constructed our new document, all we have to do is say fruit.save. And this calls the save method in Mongoose to save this fruit document into a fruits collection inside our fruits DB. And that replaces our insert document method from the Mongo client. So at the moment, you can see that we don't have our prompt. And whenever you're in that position, the first thing that will save you is Control-C. This should exit out of any process that the terminal or hyper is currently performing. And in our case, it was because we still had an active connection to our MongoDB server. Now, let's run our app.js again to save that new fruit into our database. And if I switch over to our shell, then we can go ahead and say show DBs to show that we've now updated our database with a new fruits DB. And let's say use fruits DB. And now let's see what collections we have in this database. So we'll say show collections. And you can see that automatically Mongo has dropped the capital on the F and pluralized this fruit that we specified here into a collection of fruits. And it's pretty clever how it does that. Behind the scenes, it's actually using Lodash to achieve it. We saw that in an earlier module. But essentially, it allows you to specify the singular form and work with the singular form, but behind the scenes, it will create that collection of fruits for you to be able to work with. So if we say db.fruits.find, so we show everything that's inside our fruits collection, then you can see we have a single document that has an ID, a name, a rating, and a review. Now, remember that every single time you run fruit.save, it will save the same fruit into your fruits collection in your fruits database. So if you don't want that to happen, then you can just comment out this method call and you won't end up with a whole bunch of apples in your database. But it's now time for a challenge. I want you to create a new collection, and this is going to be a collection of people. You need to create the schema for a new person, and they need to have 2 fields, a name and an age. And then you're going to create a new model from that schema of a person, and you're going to create a new person who's called John, and he's 37. And then you're going to save that new person to our database and show it using the Mongo shell. Pause the video now and complete this challenge. All right, so right below our fruit.save, we're going to use the same setup, but we're going to apply it to a collection of people now. So we're still connected to the same fruits database, which is exactly what we want, but we're going to create a new person schema. And this is going to be a new Mongoose schema. And it's going to specify that every person we create has to have a name. And they also probably should have an age. So the name is going to be of data type string, and the age will be data type number. And then we're going to create our model of a person from this schema. So it's going to equal mongoose.model, and then the singular form of a person is person. But behind the scenes, we will get a collection called people that will be created. And these people inside the collection will follow the person schema. Using that schema, we're going to create a new person. And this new person is going to have a couple of values. It's going to have a name of John and an age of 37. And now we can take this person that we created and we can save it to our database. So now if we go back to our terminal and we exit of our previous database connection and we run our node app.js again, we can go to our Mongo shell and confirm that if we say show collections, we now have a collection of fruits and a collection of people. And as I said, it's pretty clever about converting your singular form into a pluralized collection. Now, if we say db.people.find, then we end up showing all the documents that we have inside our people collection, which is John, who's 37. What if we wanted to add a bunch of fruits in bulk, like we did previously using the native MongoDB driver? Well, let's say that we create some new fruits. Let's say const, we create a kiwi. And this is going to be a new fruit with a capital F. And the kiwi is, of course, called kiwi. It has a score of 10 because kiwis are awesome. And it has a review of the best fruit. And then I'm just going to go in and add two more fruits, orange and banana. Oranges are too sour for me, and bananas have a really weird texture. So there's our three fruits. And now, in order to save it in bulk, we can tap into our fruit model and we can say insert many. Now, how did I know that I could use fruit.insertMany? Well, the documentation, of course. So if you head over to Mongoose and click on read the docs, then inside the API section, you can see that they've got all of the methods that you can do with the model listed in here. And very often when you're working with a new package, you'll be reading through the documentation and digging through it to see what it can do. So here we have this method called model.insertMany, and it allows us to insert an array of documents into a particular model, or basically our collection. The syntax basically looks like this. You specify the name of your Mongoose model, which will allow it to connect to the relevant collection and also know what the schema is it should work with. And then we use that method insertMany, and it takes two parameters. The first one is an array of objects that match that particular schema. So our fruits here, we've got kiwi, orange, and banana. So we'll add that kiwi, orange, and banana. And then the second parameter will be a callback, and it allows us to log any errors if there were any issues with inserting all of these objects into our fruits collection. And so we can check, say, if there's an error, then we'll log the error, but else, then we'll log successfully saved all the fruits to fruitsDB. And let's close that off and let's hit save. and exit out of our database and run our app.js again, you can see that we've got that callback successfully saved all of the fruits to the fruits DB. So there were no errors. And if we go and check our db.fruits.find, then we now have a few more fruits. We've got apple, kiwi, orange, and banana. We've now seen how you can create new documents and new collections using Mongoose and MongoDB. But how exactly do we access these items in our database through our app.js? How do we get access to living objects that our app can tap into? Well, that's what we're going to look at in the next lesson.